The ship's computer kept making that annoying noise, telling her things she already knew. Warning, heating system offline. Warning, hull breach detected. Warning, emergency landing protocols activated. She wanted to tell it to shut up, but she needed to focus on trying to land without dying. Through the small window, she could see white stuff everywhere. Snow, the humans called it. She had read about it in her mission files, but seeing it in person was completely different. It looked cold just by looking at it. Miles and miles of white, covering everything like a thick blanket, with dark trees, poking through here and there. The ship was falling too fast now. She pulled back on the controls as hard as she could, trying to slow down. But the engines were making weird noises and not giving her much power. The ground was getting closer and closer. She could see individual trees now, and rocks, and what looked like a small valley between two hills. Her breathing was getting quicker, not just from fear, but because the air inside the ship was getting thinner and colder. Every breath felt like ice going into her lungs. Her people were not made for this kind of environment. They needed heat like humans needed air. Without it, they would slowly shut down until their hearts stopped beating. The valley was coming up fast now. Maybe if she could aim for the soft, looking snow between those trees, the landing wouldn't be too terrible. She pushed the control stick forward and to the right, trying to steer toward what looked like the safest spot. The ship groaned and creaked as it fought against her commands, 50 feet above the ground, 30 feet, 20 feet. The snow was rushing up to meet her now. She closed her large violet eyes and held on tight. The crash was louder than thunder, and felt like being inside a giant drum that someone was hitting with hammers. The ship bounced once, twice, then slid across the snow for what felt like forever, plowing through small trees and rocks before finally coming to a stop against something solid. When everything stopped moving, Hannah opened her eyes. She was hanging upside down in her seat, held in place by the safety straps. Her head hurt and she could taste something metallic in her mouth. Blood, probably. The cockpit was mostly dark now, with only a few emergency lights still working. She tried to move her legs and felt a sharp pain shoot up from her right ankle. Something was definitely wrong there, maybe broken. The cold was getting worse too, creeping into the ship through cracks in the hull that hadn't been there before the crash. With shaking hands, she reached for the emergency beacon on her belt. If she could activate it, her people would eventually find her. But when she pressed the button, nothing happened. She tried again. Still nothing. The device must have been damaged in the crash. The reality of her situation started to sink in. She was alone on a frozen world, with no way to call for help, injured and getting colder by the minute. Her skin was already turning the darker purple that meant serious trouble. Soon it would turn almost black, and then she would fall asleep forever. Outside she could hear the wind blowing through the trees, making a lonely sound that seemed to match exactly how she felt. Do-hyun zipped up his thick winter jacket and pulled, his wool hat down over his ears as he stepped outside into the freezing night air. The cold hit his face like a slap, making his eyes water instantly. He had been working at this remote weather station in the mountains for 3 years now, and he still wasn't completely used to how brutal the winters could be up here. His job was pretty simple most days. Check the instruments, record the temperature and wind speed, send reports back to headquarters, and make sure all the equipment was working properly. It wasn't glamorous work, but Do-hyun actually liked the peace and quiet. No traffic, no crowds, no noise except the wind through the pine trees and the occasional bird call. But today had been different, really different. All afternoon his instruments had been going crazy. The atmospheric pressure readings were jumping, around like a basketball, and he kept getting these weird spikes on the radiation detector that made no sense at all. He had checked and double-checked everything, thinking maybe the cold had messed up the sensors, but all the equipment seemed to be working fine. Then around dinner time, he had seen something strange in the sky. A bright light moving way too fast to be an airplane, leaving a trail of sparks behind it as it disappeared over the ridge to the north. It looked almost like a meteor, but meteors didn't usually change direction like that thing had. Now he was doing his final check of the day, walking the perimeter of the station to make sure everything was secure for the night. The snow crunched under his boots with each step, and his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, showing him the familiar shapes of his equipment and the small building where he lived and worked. That's when he saw it. About 200 yards from his station, there was something dark sticking up out of the snow that definitely hadn't been there that morning. He stopped walking and squinted at it, trying to figure out what he was looking at. It was the wrong shape to be a fallen tree, and too big to be a rock. Do-hyun started walking toward it, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. As he got closer, he realized he was looking at some kind of metal object, partially buried in a snowdrift. It was smooth and curved in a way that seemed almost organic, like nothing he had ever seen before. Definitely not a piece of aircraft that he recognized. His heart started beating faster as he approached the object. This was clearly the source of that bright light he had seen earlier. But what was it? Some kind of experimental military aircraft. That had crashed. A satellite that had fallen out of orbit? When he got close enough to touch it, he could see that part of the hull had been torn open, creating a jagged hole about the size of a car door. Inside, he could see blinking lights, and what looked like some kind of control panel. This was definitely not any kind of technology he was familiar with. He called out, "Hello, is anyone in there?" His voice echoed strangely in the cold air. He didn't really expect an answer, but he felt like he should try. That's when he heard a very faint sound coming from inside the crashed object. It was hard to tell what it was at first, but as he listened more carefully, it sounded almost like someone breathing, but very slowly and weakly. Do-hyun's training as a volunteer firefighter kicked in immediately. If someone was trapped in there, they needed help right away. He squeezed through the opening in the hull, his flashlight beam sweeping across the interior of what he now realized was some kind of cockpit, and that's when he saw her. At first, his brain couldn't process what he was looking at. The figure strapped into the pilot's seat looked human in some ways, but wrong in others. 4 fingers instead of 5, ears that came to sharp points, and skin that was a color he had never seen on any person before, a deep blue-black that looked almost like frostbite, but all over. For a moment he just stood there, mouth hanging open, trying to understand what he was seeing. This wasn't human. This was something else entirely, something from somewhere else. But then his medical training took over. Whatever this being was, she was clearly in serious trouble. Her breathing was so slow, it was barely visible, and that blue-black color of her skin looked like severe hypothermia. He had seen that same color on people who had been caught in blizzards too long. Do-hyun didn't waste any more time thinking about how impossible this situation was. Someone needed help, and that was all that mattered right now. He started working on the safety straps that held her in the seat, his fingers clumsy in the cold, but determined to get her free before it was too late. Getting the unconscious alien back to his weather station was one of the hardest things Do-hyun had ever done. She was heavier than she looked, and carrying someone through knee-deep snow while trying not to slip and fall was exhausting work. By the time he managed to get her inside his small building, he was breathing hard and sweating despite the freezing cold. He laid her down on his couch, which was the closest thing he had to a bed besides his own narrow cot. Under the bright lights of his station, he could see just how bad her condition really was. Her skin had turned an even darker shade of blue-black, and when he touched her arm, it felt like touching ice. Her breathing was so shallow he had to put his ear close to her mouth, just to make sure she was still alive. Do-hyun had taken first aid courses as part of his job training, and he knew the basics of treating hypothermia in humans. But this wasn't a human, and he had no idea if the same rules applied. Still, it was the only knowledge he had to work with, so he decided to start there and hope for the best. First, he cranked up the heat in his station as high as it would go. The little building normally stayed at a comfortable 68 degrees, but he pushed the thermostat all the way up to 85. Then he ran to his closet and pulled out every blanket, sleeping bag, and warm piece of clothing he owned. He wrapped them all around her, creating layers upon layers of insulation, but it wasn't enough. Even after 20 minutes under all those blankets, her skin color wasn't improving at all. If anything, she seemed to be getting worse. Her breathing was getting even slower, and when he checked her pulse at her wrist, it felt weak and irregular. Panic started to set in. He was watching someone die right in front of him, and nothing he was doing seemed to help. He tried rubbing her hands and feet to get the blood flowing, like he had learned in his first aid class, but her skin remained that frightening blue-black color. That's when he remembered something from his firefighter training. Sometimes when someone had severe hypothermia, the only way to warm them up fast enough was through direct body heat transfer. Skin-to-skin contact was much more effective than blankets alone, because it transferred heat directly without any barriers. The idea made him nervous. This was clearly an intelligent being from another world, and he didn't know what was appropriate, or what might be considered disrespectful in her culture. But she was dying, and he was running out of options. Do-hyun made his decision. He quickly pulled off his heavy coat and sweater, leaving just his t-shirt. Then, as carefully and respectfully as possible, he climbed under the blankets with her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and pressing his chest against her back. The cold from her body was shocking. It was like hugging a block of ice. He could feel the heat being sucked out of his own body almost immediately, making him shiver uncontrollably. But he forced himself to stay there, holding her close and trying to share his warmth. At first, nothing seemed to happen. She remained motionless and cold, her breathing still dangerously slow. Do-hyun started to worry that he was too late, that whatever biological processes kept her alive had already shut down beyond the point where they could restart. But then, after what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes, he noticed something. The area of her back that was pressed against his chest felt slightly less cold than before. It was such a small change that he almost thought he was imagining it. But when he moved his hand to check other parts of her body, there was definitely a difference. Encouraged by this tiny sign of progress, he held on tighter, ignoring his own discomfort as the cold from her body made his muscles ache and his teeth chatter. He talked to her quietly, even though he knew she probably couldn't hear him, telling her that everything was going to be okay and that he wasn't going to give up on her. As the night wore on, he could feel gradual changes happening. Her breathing became slightly deeper and more regular. The deadly blue-black color of her skin began to fade just a little, becoming more of a dark purple. Her body started to feel less like ice and more like a person who was just very, very cold. Do-hyun dozed off several times during that long night, but he never let go of her. Every time he woke up, he checked to make sure she was still breathing, still fighting, and each time she seemed just a tiny bit warmer than before. By morning, when the first rays of sunlight came through his small window, her skin had changed to a lighter shade of purple, and her breathing was almost normal. She was still unconscious, but she was alive. Against all odds, this strange being from another world had survived the night, and Do-hyun had played a part in saving her life. The first thing Hana noticed when she woke up was warmth. Real, comfortable warmth that seemed to wrap around her, like a gentle hug. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. Her mind felt foggy, like she was trying to think through thick clouds. She blinked slowly, her large violet eyes trying to focus on what was around her. Everything looked strange and unfamiliar. The ceiling above her was made of some kind of white material she didn't recognize, and there were small lights hanging from it that gave off a soft yellow glow. This definitely wasn't her ship. As her vision cleared, she saw a face looking down at her with an expression of worry and relief. It was clearly not Velothi. The skin was a peachy pink color instead of lavender. The ears were round instead of pointed, and there were only 2 eyes instead of the 3 that her people had. This had to be one of the humans she had read about. In her mission briefings, the human, a male she thought, was saying something in what she assumed was his native language. The sounds were completely foreign to her, but his tones seemed gentle and concerned. He was holding a small cup of something that smelled warm and pleasant. Hana tried to sit up, but her body felt weak and shaky. The human immediately reached out to help her, supporting her back with one hand while offering her the cup with the other. She looked at it suspiciously for a moment. On her homeworld, accepting food or drink from a stranger was considered either very rude or very dangerous, depending on the circumstances. But something about this human's behavior seemed different from what she had expected. He wasn't demanding anything from her or acting like she owed him something. He was just helping, without being asked, without expecting anything in return. She remembered her translator device and looked down at her chest where it was usually attached to her suit. The small box was still there, but it looked damaged. Several of the indicator lights were dark, and there was a crack running down one side. She tapped it gently with one of her 4 fingers, hoping it might still work. To her relief, the device flickered to life, though it seemed to be working at only partial capacity. When the human spoke again, she could hear his words being translated into her language, though the translation was choppy and missing some words. "Are you feeling better? You were very cold." "For a long time," the translator managed to convert. His speech, though it sounded mechanical and awkward, Hannah tried to respond, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. The translator picked up her words and converted them to the human's language. "Where am I? What happened to my ship?" The human's face showed understanding, and he spoke slowly, probably to help the damaged translator work better. "You are safe. Your flying machine crashed in snow. I found you. You were very cold, almost dead, maybe. I brought you here to make you warm." As he spoke, memories started coming back to her. The crash, the terrible cold, the feeling of her life slowly slipping away as her body shut down from the low temperature. She remembered seeing this human's face briefly before, losing consciousness, but she had thought it might have been a hallucination. "You saved me?" she asked, still not quite believing it. The human nodded, and through the translator his words came through. "I tried to help. You needed to be warm. I gave you my heat for many hours. 3 days you sleep. 3 days." Hannah was amazed she had survived that long. Her people could only handle extreme cold for a few hours at most before their biological systems shut down permanently. The fact that she was alive and recovering meant this human had somehow kept her warm enough to prevent that from happening, but why? This was the part that confused her the most. In Velathi society, you helped family members and close friends, and only if you expected something in return. Helping a complete stranger, especially one from a different species, was simply not something that happened. It would be considered foolish and wasteful. "Why did you help me?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "I'm not of your kind, you do not know me. What do you want from me in return?" The human looked surprised by her question, as if he didn't understand why she was asking it. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to think about how to answer. When he finally spoke, his words were simple, but they hit her like a physical blow. "You needed help. That is enough reason." Hannah stared at him in complete shock. Through her damaged translator, those words might have been simple, but their meaning was revolutionary to her way of thinking. This human had risked his own comfort, his own safety, possibly even his own life, to save a stranger. Not because he expected payment, not because someone ordered him to, not because it would benefit him in any way, just because she needed help. As her strength slowly returned over the following hours, Hannah found herself watching this human, Do-hyun, he had told her his name was, with growing fascination. Everything he did seemed to contradict what she had been taught about primitive species. He shared his food with her without being asked. He gave up his own sleeping area so she could be more comfortable. He spent his time taking care of her instead of going about his own business. This wasn't the behavior of a primitive being at all. This was something her own advanced civilization had somehow lost along the way. As the days passed and Hannah grew stronger, she found herself spending more and more time talking with Do-hyun. Her translator was working better now that she had managed to repair some of the damaged circuits, and their conversations became easier and more detailed. What started as simple exchanges about basic needs had grown into something much deeper. Do-hyun was endlessly curious about her world, asking questions about everything from what she ate to how her technology worked. Hannah found his enthusiasm refreshing. On her home planet, most people were too busy with their assigned tasks to show much interest in anything outside their specific area of expertise. "Tell me about where you come from," Do-hyun said one evening as they sat by the fire he had built. In his small fireplace, he had given her his most comfortable chair and wrapped her in his warmest blanket, while he sat on a cushion on the floor. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment, picturing home. "My world is very different from yours," she began. "We have 3 moons in our sky, and they are so bright at night that you can read by their light. Our cities are built from crystal that we grow in special farms. The buildings rise up like mountains, all smooth and clear, reflecting the light of our 2 suns." Do-hyun listened with fascination as she described the floating transport pods that carried people between the crystal towers, the vast libraries where all knowledge was stored in glowing data crystals, and the great halls where the Council of Logic made all the important decisions for their society. "It sounds beautiful," he said, "but also kind of cold. Not temperature cold, but like there's no warmth between people." Hannah was surprised by how quickly he had understood something that had taken her years to recognize. "You are right," she admitted. "We have eliminated many things we consider wasteful or inefficient. Emotions that serve no logical purpose, relationships that do not advance our goals, actions that benefit others without benefiting ourselves." "That sounds lonely," Do-hyun said quietly. "I thought it was normal," Hannah replied, "until I met you." In return, Do-hyun shared pieces of human culture with her. He showed her books filled with stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. He played music on his old radio, everything from classical symphonies to folk songs that told tales of love and loss and hope. Hannah was amazed by how much emotion humans put into their art. But what fascinated her most were the news recordings Do-hyun showed her on his computer. Video after video of humans helping each other during disasters. Firefighters running into burning buildings to save people they had never met. Ordinary citizens forming human chains to rescue flood victims. Doctors traveling to poor countries to treat diseases, asking nothing in return. "This happens often?" she asked, watching footage of an earthquake rescue where dozens of volunteers were digging through rubble with their bare hands, searching for survivors. "All the time," Do-hyun said. "Whenever something bad happens, people show up to help. Not because anyone forces them to, but because they want to." Hannah watched the screen in amazement. One video showed a man giving his jacket to a homeless person on a cold night. Another showed a group of teenagers using their own money to buy groceries for an elderly neighbor. A third showed rescue workers saving animals from a forest fire, putting themselves at risk for creatures that couldn't even thank them. "In my world," she said slowly, "we have stories like this. Very old stories from thousands of years ago before we became civilized. We call them myths, tales of heroes who helped others without thinking of themselves. But we teach children that these are just fantasies, stories to entertain us, but not to copy." "Why?" Do-hyun asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because our leaders say it is inefficient. They say that if everyone spent time helping random strangers, nothing important would get done. Society would collapse." Do-hyun was quiet for a moment, thinking about this. Then he said, "But look at all the things we've built. Cities, art, music, science, space travel. We did all of that while still helping each other. Maybe helping each other is part of what makes us strong, not weak." This idea hit Hannah like a lightning bolt. She had always been taught that her society's efficiency and logic made them superior to primitive species like humans. But humans had achieved spaceflight too, and they had done it while maintaining something her people had given up, the willingness to care for others without expecting anything back. She began to see Do-hyun's rescue of her in a completely new light. It wasn't an unusual act of foolishness, as her people would have called it. It was just him being human. And maybe, she thought, being human was something worth aspiring to. "Your people," she said one day, "they are not primitive at all, are they?" Do-hyun laughed. "We make plenty of mistakes. We fight sometimes. We can be selfish. We don't always make the smartest choices. But we try to take care of each other. That's just who we are." As Hannah's strength returned, she realized that her mission reports would need to be very different from what her commanders expected. Humans weren't a species to be dismissed or avoided. They were teachers, showing the galaxy something that advanced civilizations had forgotten, that true strength came not from cold efficiency, but from the warmth of caring for others. 3 days after Hannah's ship had disappeared from their sensors, the bridge of the Velathi survey vessel, Crystal Dawn, was buzzing with quiet, efficient activity. Commander Junsik stood at the central command console, his three violet eyes studying the holographic display that showed Earth's northern hemisphere. His lavender skin had a slight greenish tint to it, which among his people indicated stress and concern. "Still no response from Scout Hana's emergency beacon?" he asked his communications officer for the third time that hour. "Negative, Commander," came the reply. "All frequencies remain silent. Her ship's signature completely vanished from our tracking systems 72 hours ago." Junsik's pointed ears twitched with frustration. Hana was one of their best scouts, young but incredibly skilled at navigation and survival. The fact that she had gone silent for this long could only mean one thing. Something had gone very wrong during her reconnaissance mission to this primitive world. He turned to his science officer, a tall female named Minji, whose job was to analyze the planet below them. "What are the surface conditions where her ship was last detected?" Minji's fingers danced across her console, pulling up detailed scans of Earth's northern regions. "Extremely hostile, Commander. Surface temperatures are far below what any Velathi could survive for more than a few hours. The entire area is covered in frozen water precipitation. Our analysis shows it would be impossible for any of our people to survive an emergency landing in such conditions. And the dominant species in that region? Primitive bipeds called humans," Minji replied, her voice carrying the slight disdain that most Velathi felt when discussing less advanced civilizations. "So they appear to be barely past their industrial age. No advanced technology. No space travel capabilities beyond crude chemical rockets. Their society is chaotic and inefficient. Based on our observations, they spend most of their time fighting among themselves or engaging in wasteful emotional behaviors." Commander Junsik nodded grimly. This confirmed what he had expected to hear. If Hana had crashed on this frozen world, surrounded by primitive beings who probably couldn't even understand what they were looking at, her chances of survival were essentially zero. But he had to be sure. Hana was not just any scout. She was the daughter of one of the High Council members back home. Her father had specifically requested that no effort be spared in determining her fate. Dead or alive, they needed to find her and bring her home. "Prepare 3 search shuttles," he commanded. "Full stealth capability engaged. We cannot let the primitives detect our presence." His tactical officer, a stern-faced male named Kyung-soo, looked up from his station. "Commander, our long-range sensors are detecting some unusual readings from the crash site area. The energy signatures are confusing. Explain." The small scout ship rocked back and forth like a leaf in a storm as it fell through the thick clouds surrounding Earth. Inside the cramped cockpit, Hana's heart was beating so fast she could hear it echoing in her pointed ears. Her 4 fingers wrapped tightly around the control stick, but nothing she did seemed to work anymore. Red warning lights blinked all around her, and that awful beeping sound wouldn't stop. Hana had been flying ships since she was barely old enough to reach the controls, but she had never felt anything like this before. Her home planet was always warm, with golden sand dunes and 2 bright suns that kept everything nice and toasty. The coldest day back home was still warmer than most humans would find comfortable. But here, even inside her ship, she could feel something she had never experienced before. Real cold that seemed to bite at her skin. Her lavender-colored skin was already starting to change, turning darker purple around her fingertips and the edges of her face. This was bad. Very bad. When Velathi skin turned that color, it meant their body was getting too cold to work properly. It was like a warning system that told them to find warmth quickly or face serious trouble. Kyung-soo's brow furrowed as he studied his instruments. "We're picking up traces of Velathi biosignatures, but they're very faint and intermittent. It's almost as if..." He paused, double-checking his readings. "As if someone is still alive down there, but barely." A ripple of surprise went through the bridge crew. Commander Junsik felt his own heart rate increase. "That's impossible. No Velathi could survive this long in those conditions. Your instruments must be malfunctioning." "I've run diagnostics 3 times, sir. The equipment is functioning normally. The readings are definitely there, but they don't make sense. The biosignature appears to be getting stronger, not weaker. which would suggest the subject is recovering rather than dying. Commander Junsik stared at the display showing Earth's frozen surface. How could anyone, even someone as resourceful as Hana, survive in such a hostile environment? The planet's surface was covered in ice and snow for thousands of miles, in every direction. The primitive humans had no advanced medical technology, no understanding of Velathi physiology, and no reason to help a being from another world, even if they found one. Perhaps, suggested his science officer Minji, the readings are from her ship's emergency systems, some kind of automated survival protocol that's keeping her in stasis until rescue arrives. But Kyung-soo shook his head. The signatures aren't coming from the crash site itself. They're approximately 200 meters away from where her ship went down, in what appears to be some kind of primitive human structure. This information made the situation even more puzzling. If Hana was somehow still alive, and if she was, in a human building rather than her own ship, that suggested contact between their scout and the local population. Such contact violated every protocol in the Velathi Exploration Manual. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "I'm also picking up some strange transmissions from that same area. They're not in any language in our database, but they appear to be some kind of primitive radio signals, very basic electromagnetic communications." Commander Junsik made his decision. Whatever was happening down on that frozen world, he needed to see it with his own eyes. The idea that Hana might still be alive seemed impossible, but the alternative, explaining to the High Council that he had failed to investigate every possibility, was unacceptable. "Launch the search shuttles immediately," he ordered. "Full stealth mode. We approach at minimum altitude and conduct detailed scans of the entire area. If there's even the smallest chance that Scout Hana is still alive, we will find her." As the three sleek Velathi shuttles detached from the main ship and began their descent toward Earth's surface, the crew prepared for what they expected to be a recovery mission. None of them imagined they were about to discover something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about primitive species and the nature of survival itself. The three Velathi search shuttles descended through the cold mountain, hair-like silent shadows, their advanced stealth technology making them completely invisible to any human detection systems. Inside the lead shuttle, Sub-Commander Hyerin checked her instruments one final time as they approached the coordinates where their sensors had detected the mysterious biosignatures. "Target structure directly ahead," announced her pilot. "Primitive. Construction appears to be some kind of monitoring station. Very basic technology." Hyerin peered through the shuttle's viewport at the small building sitting alone in the snowy valley below. It looked exactly like what she had expected from this primitive world. Rough, simple construction with no apparent defenses or advanced systems. Smoke was rising from what appeared to be a crude chimney, suggesting the inhabitants were using actual fire for heat. "How barbaric. Bio readings are definitely stronger now," reported her scanner operator. "Confirmed Velathi life signs inside the structure, along with one human signature." "Weapons status?" Hyerin asked, though she didn't expect to need them against such primitive beings. "No weapons detected in the structure. The human appears to be completely unarmed." This was puzzling. If the human had discovered their crashed scout, why hadn't they contacted their authorities? Why weren't there dozens of their primitive aircraft and ground vehicles surrounding the area? In every scenario the Velathi had studied about first contact with lesser species, the primitives always called for backup when they found something beyond their understanding. The three shuttles landed silently in the snow about 50 meters from the building. Hyerin and her team of 6 soldiers emerged, their advanced armor systems automatically adjusting to the frigid temperature. Each soldier carried energy weapons that could stun or kill, depending on the setting, though Hyerin hoped they wouldn't be necessary. As they approached the building, Hyerin activated her suit's translation system and prepared to deal with whatever primitive scenario they might encounter inside. Perhaps the human was holding Hana prisoner, hoping to trade her for some kind of reward. Perhaps they had found her body and were afraid of being blamed for her death. Or perhaps they were simply too stupid to understand what they had discovered. What Hyerin was not prepared for was the sound of laughter coming from inside the building. She stopped in her tracks, holding up a hand to halt her team. Laughter. That made no sense at all. Through her helmet's audio sensors, she could hear two voices, engaged in what sounded like casual conversation. One voice was definitely Velarthi, speaking in their native language. The other was human, speaking in the primitive local tongue, but with a tone that sounded friendly and relaxed. Hyerin activated her suit's visual enhancement and peered through the building's window. What she saw inside made her question whether her equipment was malfunctioning. Hana, very much alive and apparently healthy, was sitting comfortably in a chair near a primitive fire. Her skin had returned to its normal lavender color, and she looked completely at ease. Across from her sat a human male, and they appeared to be sharing some kind of meal together. Both of them were smiling? This was impossible. Hana should have been dead from hypothermia within hours of crashing on this frozen world. Even if she had somehow survived, she should have been desperately trying to signal for rescue, not having casual dinner conversations with the local primitives. Hyerin activated her communication system and prepared to announce their presence. But before she could speak, the door of the building opened and Hana stepped out into the snow. She wasn't wearing her environmental suit, just some kind of primitive clothing that the human had apparently given her. She looked directly at Hyerin and her team, showing no signs of distress or fear. "Sub-Commander Hyerin," Hana said calmly. "In their native language, I'm glad you found me, but you can lower your weapons. There's no danger here." "Scout Hana," Hyerin replied, unable to hide her confusion. "Explain your status. Are you injured? Are you being held against your will?" "Not at all," Hana said, and then she did something that shocked Hyerin to her core. She turned back toward the building and called out in the human language, "Do-hyun, please come out. I'd like you to meet my people." The human male emerged from the building, and Hyerin's first instinct was to raise her weapon. But Hana immediately stepped between them, holding out her hands in a gesture of protection. "Do not threaten him," Hana said firmly. "This human saved my life. Without his help, you would have found only my frozen body." Hyerin stared at the scene in front of her, trying to process what she was seeing. The human showed no signs of fear, despite being faced with 6 armed aliens. Instead, he looked curious and concerned. He was looking at Hana as if he was worried about her safety, not his own. "Scout Hana," Hyerin said slowly, "please explain how you survived. Our analysis indicated that this world's conditions would be fatal to any Velarthi within hours." "They would have been," Hana replied. "I was dying when Do-hyun found me. My body temperature had dropped so low that my biological functions were shutting down. But he shared his own body heat with me for 3 days, keeping me alive until my systems could recover." Hyerin's scientific training told her this was impossible. Primitive humans had no understanding of Velarthi physiology. They shouldn't have known how to treat hypothermia in an alien species. They certainly shouldn't have been willing to risk their own lives for a complete stranger from another world. "That makes no logical sense," she said. "What did this human want in return for his assistance?" Hana smiled, and it was an expression Hyerin had rarely seen on any Velarthi face. "Nothing. He wanted nothing at all. He helped me simply because I needed help." The human, meanwhile, was looking back and forth between them, clearly trying to understand their conversation, even though he couldn't speak their language. His body language showed concern, not for himself, but for Hana. He was worried about how this encounter might affect her. Hyerin realized she was witnessing something that challenged every assumption her people had made about primitive species. This wasn't supposed to be possible. The tension in the cold mountain air was thick enough to cut with a knife as Sub-Commander Hyerin activated her private communication channel to speak with her team. The 6 Velarthi soldiers formed a loose circle around Hana and Do-hyun, their weapons still lowered but ready to be raised at a moment's notice. "This situation is completely outside our mission parameters," Hyerin said quietly to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Sunwoo. "Protocol 77 Alpha. Here's clear about unauthorized contact with primitive species." Lieutenant Sunwoo nodded grimly. He was a by-the-book officer who had memorized every regulation in the Velarthi military manual. Complete elimination of witnesses and all evidence of contact, standard procedure for maintaining galactic security. But Hana heard their whispered conversation and immediately stepped closer to Do-hyun, her translator working to help her understand the human's confused expression. She could see in his eyes that he sensed something was wrong, even though he couldn't understand their language. "You will not harm him," Hana said loudly, switching back to Velathi so her own people could understand her clearly. "I absolutely forbid it." Hiren's three eyes widened in surprise. Scouts didn't give orders to sub-commanders, especially not in situations like this. "Scout Hana, you're clearly suffering from some kind of trauma-induced psychological damage. Your thinking is impaired. Step away from the primitive and let us handle this situation properly." "My thinking has never been clearer," Hana replied, her voice growing stronger and more determined. "This human risked his own life to save mine. He asked for nothing in return. He treated me with kindness and respect when he could have easily left me to die or turned me over to his authorities. You will not repay that kindness with violence." Lieutenant Sunwoo activated his weapons targeting system, though he kept it pointed at the ground. "Sub-Commander, we have our orders. Any primitive who gains knowledge of our existence becomes a security threat to the entire Velathi civilization." The Greater Council was very specific about this. "The Greater Council," Hana said with a bitter laugh, "has never met a human. They've never seen what these people are capable of. They make their decisions based on assumptions and prejudices, not facts." Do-hyun, meanwhile, was starting to understand that something serious was happening. He couldn't follow their conversation, but he could read body language and tone of voice. The armed figures around them were becoming more agitated, and their weapons were starting to move in his direction. More importantly, he could see that Hana was upset and trying to protect him from something. "Hana," he said quietly in his own language, knowing her translator would pick it up. "What's happening? Are you in trouble because of me?" She turned to look at him, and her expression softened for a moment. "No, Do-hyun, you're in trouble because of outdated laws and fear, but I won't let anything happen to you." Hiren was growing impatient with what she saw as insubordination. "Scout Hana, you've clearly been compromised by extended contact with this primitive. Your emotional attachment is clouding your judgment. Stand down immediately." "Emotional attachment?" Hana laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "You say that like it's a disease. This human showed me something we've forgotten how to do. Care about someone other than ourselves. When was the last time any Velathi risked their own comfort to help a stranger? When was the last time anyone in our entire civilization did something good without calculating what they would get in return?" The other soldiers were starting to look uncomfortable. Lieutenant Sunwoo shifted his weight from foot to foot. "That's not relevant to the current situation." "It's the only thing that's relevant," Hana shot back. "Look at what we've become. We're so afraid of inefficiency that we've eliminated compassion. We're so obsessed with logic that we've forgotten wisdom. This human, with his primitive technology and simple society, achieved something our advanced medical systems might not have been able to do. He saved my life through pure determination and selflessness." Hiren tried to regain control of the conversation. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change our security protocols. One primitive's life cannot be weighed against the safety of our entire civilization." "But that's exactly the kind of thinking that's destroying us," Hana argued, her voice rising with passion. "We've become so focused on protecting ourselves that we've lost sight of what makes life worth protecting. This human didn't ask what species I was or what I could do for him. He saw someone in need and helped. That's not primitive. That's evolved in a way we've forgotten how to be." Do-hyun took a step forward, even though he was clearly frightened. "Hana, whatever's happening, you don't have to fight your own people because of me. I knew helping you might be complicated, but I'd do it again. That's just who we are." His words, translated by Hana's device, hit the Velathi soldiers like a physical blow. Here was a being facing possible death, and his concern was still for Hana's well-being, not his own survival. "Here you see," Hana said to her people. "This is what we could learn from them if we weren't too proud and scared to try." The argument was far from over, but something had shifted in the group dynamic. Even Lieutenant Sunwoo was looking thoughtful, instead of simply following orders. The silence that followed Hana's passionate speech stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few minutes. The Velathi soldiers stood in the snow. their weapons still in their hands but no longer pointed with the same certainty they had shown before. Even Lieutenant Sunwoo seemed to be wrestling with thoughts that went against everything he had been taught. Sub-Commander Hyerin was the first to break the silence. She deactivated her weapon and took a step back, her 3 violet eyes studying Do-hyun with new interest. "This human," she said slowly, "he truly asked for nothing in return for saving your life." "Nothing," Hana confirmed. "When I asked him why he helped me, he said that I needed help and that was reason enough. It's that simple to him." Hyerin walked closer to Do-hyun, who stood his ground despite clearly being nervous. She activated her own translator and spoke directly to him for the first time. "Human, do you understand what you have done? You have saved the life of a being from another world. You have made contact with a species your people have never encountered. Are you not afraid?" Do-hyun considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm scared, yes, but not of you or Hana. I'm scared that I might have done something wrong that could hurt her or cause problems for my world. But I'm not sorry I helped her. I couldn't live with myself if I had just left her to die in the snow." His words, translated into Velathi, caused a ripple of surprise among the soldiers. This wasn't the response of a primitive being trying to gain advantage from the situation. This was someone genuinely concerned about the consequences of his actions for others, not for himself. Lieutenant Sunwoo lowered his weapon completely. "Sub-Commander, perhaps we should contact command before making any irreversible decisions." Hyerin nodded slowly. She activated her long-range communicator and within minutes was speaking directly to Commander Junsik aboard their ship. The conversation was intense but brief, conducted in rapid Velathi that Do-hyun couldn't follow, even with translation. When she finished the call, Hyerin looked at Hana with something that might have been respect. "Command has agreed to delay standard protocols pending a full evaluation of this situation. Scout Hana, you will return to the ship to make a complete report. The human will come with us for questioning." "No," Hana said firmly. "If Do-hyun comes to our ship, it will be as a guest and an equal, not as a prisoner. He has done nothing wrong. He has knowledge of our existence. That makes him a security risk. It also makes him the most qualified person on this planet to serve as a liaison between our peoples," Hana countered. "He's proven he can be trusted. He's shown wisdom and compassion that some of our own leaders could learn from." Do-hyun stepped forward, his fear clearly visible but his resolve steady. "I'll go with you if it helps, Hana, and if it might help our peoples understand each other better. But I want to make something clear. I'm not going to betray my own species or give you information that could hurt them. I'll be honest with you, but I won't be a traitor." His statement drew nods of approval from several of the Velati soldiers. Even in an alien context, they recognized and respected the concept of loyalty to one's own people. Over the following weeks, what started as a security incident gradually transformed into something unprecedented in Velathi history. Do-hyun was indeed brought aboard their ship, but as Hana had demanded, he was treated as an honored guest rather than a prisoner. The more the Velathi interacted with him, the more they began to understand what Hana had been trying to tell them. This human possessed qualities their own civilization had systematically eliminated over centuries of pursuing perfect efficiency. He was curious without being acquisitive, helpful without expecting payment, and brave without being reckless. Commander Junsik found himself spending hours in conversation with Do-hyun, trying to understand how human society functioned when people regularly helped strangers, took care of those who couldn't take care of themselves, and made decisions based on compassion as well as logic. "Your species fights wars," the commander pointed out during one of their talks. "You have poverty, crime, environmental destruction. How can you claim to be evolved when your world is full of such problems?" Do-hyun nodded sadly. "We're not perfect. We make terrible mistakes sometimes, but we also keep trying to do better. And when disaster strikes, when people are in trouble, we help each other. That's what makes us human." The breakthrough came when Do-hyun asked to speak with Earth's leaders about the situation. Rather than trying to hide the contact or gain personal advantage from it, he wanted to prepare his world for the possibility of broader contact with galactic civilization. "You would trust your own species with this knowledge?" Hyerin asked, surprised. "They have a right to know," Do-hyun replied. And if we're going to have a relationship with your people, it should be built on honesty, not secrets. This attitude, so foreign to Velarthi thinking, gradually won over even the most skeptical members of the crew. When the formal recommendation was sent back to the Velarthi High Council, it wasn't the expected report about eliminating primitive witnesses. Instead, it was a proposal for unprecedented first contact with a species that had something valuable to teach the galaxy. Hana chose to remain on Earth as the first official Velarthi ambassador, working alongside Do-hyun to prepare both species for a new kind of relationship. Their friendship, born from a moment of crisis in a frozen mountain valley, became the foundation for an alliance that would change both civilizations. Years later, when historians from both worlds wrote about this first contact, they would focus on the advanced technology, the diplomatic protocols, and the strategic implications. But Hana and Do-hyun always remembered it differently. They remembered that the most important moments in history sometimes begin with the simplest question. Do you need help?